They were like, we used to have 6 dogs. We don't know what happened to five, the first five, but at least we know what happened to the sixth one. So,
I could guess what happened to the other 5.
You are listening to Urban Wildlife Podcast.
Welcome back to the first episode of the second season of the Urban Wildlife Podcast.
Howdy. Glad to have you back. Well, I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, who are you?
Oh, I am Tony Croasdale. You didn't say who you were.
I'm Billy Brown.
And I am the honored guest this evening, Michael McGraw.
He's the guest and he's the host because we're recording in his living room.
Indeed.
Aside from just being our buddy, why would we have you on this podcast?
I am a consulting wildlife biologist. Do work mostly in the Midwest and the Northeast in the United States. Avifaunal ecology and herpetology are my pleasures.
There you go.
Mike.
Ecologist extraordinaire.
I'm going to say, I don't think I've met at his age anyway, I don't think I've met a more well-rounded naturalist.
Well, I appreciate that.
All right, so I went back and forth on how to start the second season, on whether we go subtle with something, like charismatic microfauna or some kind of plant, or do we go like big and dramatic with the charismatic megafauna? And maybe it's a weakness, but
The latter.
yeah, I went with the charismatic megafauna.
And we chose Mike to be our guest because Mike is himself a charismatic megafauna.
This season, we got a lot of exciting stuff to lay on you.
We've gone totally international.
We've got totally international.
Urban wildlife is the international language.
We speak the language of wildlife.
Indeed.
Nothing better in the Anthropocene, right, than
Yes.
to travel the globe.
And tonight we enter in the Anthropocene.
I'll drink to that.
We'll mix that up later. Don't worry. But we're going to start big and dramatic with big urban carnivores. Even our synanthropic organism is a carnivore. We're going to talk about leopards in a couple places. In Mumbai in India, as well as in Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia. We're also going to talk about hyenas in Addis Ababa. And we don't have any comments because it's the first episode. Yeah.
So please comment. I'm saying we see our followers are growing, we see subscribers are growing, Facebook, all that stuff. We see that we're getting out there.
But we've got listeners all over the world. We got listeners in England. We got listeners in China. We got listeners in Australia. We got listeners in all kinds of rad places.
England seems to be a really hotbed of our listeners, apparently.
Yes.
Well, nice.
And we're bringing it to our English listeners with a whole bunch of English stories this year. And so we want to hear from you, even if you're not a scientist, even if you're not a professional. If you can talk about the fox in your garden or the whatever birds you got singing outside your window.
The hyena that ate your cousin.
The rattlesnake under the rock outside your garage. I don't know. All these things we find interesting. And, there's some things in particular. I'm going to put in a call for some specific things. We want to hear about Australian possums.
Yeah.
Because Tony and I have decided that your possums are cuter than our possums.
So much more cute.
And
I think our opossum, because they call them possums everywhere. Ours are technically opossums.
opossum.
Opossum, where art thou? Our opossums, I think they got like a charm about them.
Well, and also in relative terms, there are only marsupials, so they're so special in that regard.
They're very special.
And their prehensile tail makes them even extra rad.
I haven't talked on this podcast about the possum story from in front of my house.
Why not?
Well, I don't know. Well, here we go. So there was a possum laying in the street. Was it dead? Was it just plain possum? And we're looking at it, and these two guys come up, and they were like, "If it was the winter, I'd take it home. I'd burn the hair off, and I'd eat it." And my friend's like, "Man, that thing's too ugly to eat." And the guy just goes, "Everybody gotta love somebody," and walks off.
Where was this? Is this in the Northeast?
No. This is at like 50th and Cedar. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Everybody got love. And we're just like,
I love that he brought his prey item into like the realm of love. Like,
yeah. And we were just like,
it's like, I'm not eating this to survive. I'm eating this because I love it.
I mean, really, if you really think about what he said, it doesn't make any sense. But in the moment, me and my friend were just like, yeah.
Did you write a poem or a song related to
You can't
this?
pull
We
that
probably
out.
will. I think we're upping.
Awesome love song.
I don't. We're recording this before we have everything. In the queue, so we don't know what we have exactly queued up, but we are going to up the amount of songs and jingles or whatever, what have you, this season too. I hope you're prepared for that.
Yes, yes, you will be. So send us your stuff. It can be like a 30-second little bit that you record on your phone, and then tweet at us, hit us on Facebook, email us. You can send us that little bit of sound, and we can put it on the podcast as an audio postcard.
Oh, we could talk about another feedback thing that we did have is related to the songs and everything. Is in addition to Man Crusher, this other band has reached out to us, Moist Outlet, and they will be providing some of the music for this next season.
I credit this guy. We're going to interview him later in the season. I already interviewed him, but we're going to talk about his interview later in the season. Tristan Donovan wrote a great book called Feral Cities. And when I was asking Tristan what he didn't get to fit into the book that he heard about later, he was like, "Oh, hyenas and Addis Ababa." To which I said, "What the hell are you talking about?" He's like, "Oh, they're real." And so then I Googled it, and the first article I found was something from the BBC, which was a little sensationalistic, talking about them eating people and stuff.
Just their toes and fingers while they slept.
Toes and fingers while they sleep, that kind of thing. And then I found another article in The Guardian by somebody who's a translator. You'll hear from in a second, Eve. And he, in this article in The Guardian, was like, well, wait a second. I've lived here for 14 years. I see them all the time. I don't know about them killing anybody. Hardly anybody. Maybe one person. And so then I said, I have to talk to that guy. And so we did, and here is that interview.
Sure. Well, my name is Eve Marie Stranger, and I'm a writer. I'm a simultaneous interpreter and translator, and I'm based here in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. I should maybe start by telling you about the first time I met some hyenas. I just moved to Addis a couple of months previously, and I was walking home after a couple of drinks in one of the busiest areas of town, so maybe a kilometer from one of the main avenues in Addis Ababa, and all of a sudden I came up against this couple of hyenas. I was extremely startled. They were not. They just melted back into the shadows very, very easily, calmly, while I was not accustomed to this, to meeting this kind of animal. Obviously, they're very, very big beasts, and so that was my first real encounter with such a big animal, and it was in the midst of Addis Ababa, which just to situate in terms of size for your listeners, is a city of something like maybe 4 million inhabitants. And I tell people about it the very same night, the next morning, and nobody thought it was any big deal, because meeting a hyena in Addis is just, I must say was maybe at least 14 years ago. It was, you had hyenas not only visiting the city, but you even had hyenas who had dens in wastelands inside of the city, and ever since then I've seen hyenas in Addis, all over Ethiopia. You really see that people have got a very different relationship here in Ethiopia. They're not feared. They're normally not hunted down. They're not really considered to be pests. The city was basically a large conurbation. There were lots of people, but there were always lots of pockets of, you could call it wasteland. There were areas which were farmed, so there's a lot of sort of city gardens, and there were also pasture lands lost in the middle of all this. So you had a great presence of domestic animals, of forest land, and Addis is built on a plain and on the slopes of a ridge that dominates it to the north, which is now covered in forest, which gives it the forest itself now has a great abundance of wildlife, but the high nature of the city and the fact that it's sort of built into the slopes of this mountain means that there are a lot of very rapid streams coming through the city. Now, these streams are very deep, they're ravines, basically, and I mean, even to this day, as Addis has really become much more built up, these streams provide very convenient entry points for any large animal that would like to come in. For example, hyena use these as corridors to get into the city, and also, of course, because these streams, even if they're heavily polluted nowadays, because they've got lots of water and an abundance of trees and bush, there's also a lot of bird life, a lot of food, a lot of things happening, and they're also used, of course, as garbage chutes by the inhabitants of the city, which is terrible for pollution and in many ways, many fronts. But at the same time, it means that again there's an abundance of food. So to this day, I was saying these are really entry points, corridors for animals such as hyenas. But of course, on the other hand, Addis is no longer the sort of sleepy, interconnected village land that it used to be maybe just 15 years ago. There's a sort of there's a ring road, there's a tramway that's just opened. The roads are 4 times wider than when I arrived. So I was touching upon the fact that Addis is built up against a little mountain range, which is completely covered in forest. So, and my house happens to be at the top of the town. I'm a few hundred meters, a 5-minute walk from the beginning of this forest, which is called Entoto. So, the fact that the city is built right up against this forest, it does mean that there is still a huge swathe of territory all along the northern limit of the city, which is inhabited by both people and wild animals. So, for example, in my garden, I do still continue to have hyena just about every night. Actually, a few months ago, I went for a walk in the middle of the day, just 10 minutes away, maybe. I nearly stepped on a hyena, which was it would just lie down sunbathing. It was asleep in the sun. So I nearly walked on it, you know. And apart from that, not that I've seen it personally, because that's much more difficult to see, but there's a strong presence of leopard in the forest as well. And again, to tell you how interconnected all this is, maybe 4 or 5 years ago it was, the British Embassy here in Addis, which is built on this side of town, meaning the northern side, but not next to the forest. It's well inside the built-up area. They had a huge problem because they had this leopard that was picking up all their cats and dogs. Well, he was picking them off one by one.
That is goddamn amazing.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. It's amazing how such a beast of an animal, and being a Westerner, you know, the way I grew up, lusting over charismatic megafauna like many do here, you think about lions and hyenas, right?
Yeah.
And these amazing packs of, you know, the only animals that could stand up to a pride of lions to steal food, and then you learn about their powerful, crushing jaws with their overlapping teeth. And then to think that they're just sunbathing in the street as you're walking to work, you could almost step on a sleeping spotted hyena, right?
Or that, like, in the middle of the night, you're walking home from the bar and, like, oh, look, a couple of hyenas. and I'll mention a few things that'll segue into the next piece, I think, nicely, is that this is a theme that came up very early last season, but that what we think of as wild animals don't end up in cities just because.
Right.
They come in because there's something that they want, or there's a
It's
resource
adaptations.
there's a resource that they're coming for. In Addis Ababa, from what I read, it was urban slaughterhouses and like waste from slaughterhouses and trash and the dogs. Same thing with the leopards. They're coming in for the dogs and the cats, which will so today's synanthropic organism is
Canis familiaris. Synanthropic dog.
bow wow wow yippee yo yippee yay, bow wow yippee yo yippee yay.
Man's best friend.
House dog.
There you go. The more I've been reading about dogs, and there's a lot of articles out that I've been reading about origins of dogs, and one of the interesting angles of it is that it isn't like our ancestors grabbed some wolf pups and just brought them into the tent.
Right.
Or to the cave. The idea is that these were wolves that started following humans around
On
and
the
eating their trash.
fringes of the campsites for a long time.
God knows how many hundreds
Wait until
of
the fire
thousands
goes
of
out.
years.
Right.
And then they sort of got brought in as pets too. Like in Philadelphia, we think of dogs as pets. Like the default dog is one that's living in someone's house as their friend. And in a lot of places in the world, and probably for most of the history of dogs, that was not the default dog. The default dog was a dog living in the street, or a dog that's like semi like pet, which we're going to hear about in our next piece.
Which is much more coincides with the traditional relationship between a wild dog and people.
Exactly. And it also sets them up more as a synanthropic organism, like commensal in the same idea as this is going to piss off the dog people, but kind of like a rat or like a pigeon. Like an animal that lives around us and eats our scraps.
Yeah. Benefits from our scraps.
Synanthropic organism.
And so when we think of a resource that leopards might come into a city for, they're coming in for
hunt the domesticated,
the semi-domesticated, domesticated dogs. Part of my brain thinks of like in ecology terms of like nutrient flows, and so like it's sort of just like the crumbs from someone's soft pretzel, like it's eaten by a pigeon that gets eaten by a peregrine falcon, like. So in whether it's Addis Ababa or in Nairobi or in Bangalore or in Mumbai, I've even heard Beijing, although we're having trouble tracking that down. The nutrient flow is like humans, human trash, maybe dog food, back to leopards. The most famous place where humans and leopards are interacting in a city is Mumbai in India. Mumbai, otherwise known in the past more as Bombay, is the financial, commercial, and entertainment capital of India. It is a really big city, population something like 12 million, and metropolitan area 18 million. So
it's ridiculous. Massive
city. Kind of like the New York plus Los Angeles of India. So we have two interviews. One with Sunetro Ghoshal, who volunteers / works with basically a friends group for a national park on the edge of Mumbai, doing work on the leopard-human interaction stuff. And then with a guy who had volunteered with them in the past, is now working more independently, but who had talked about a specific episode of humans and leopards interacting. So we're going to listen to these guys now.
Okay, my name is Sunatra Ghoshal, and I'm part of this project called Mumbaikas for SGNP, which was started by the Forest Department in Bombay to manage leopards. And my background is basically I study human-wildlife interactions, especially large carnivores. Maybe I should start with giving you a little background about SGNP. Okay, it's 104 square kilometer park, of which 56 square kilometers is within the municipal limits of Mumbai. The landscape inside the park is undulating, and it's part of it is moist deciduous forest, and part of it is dry deciduous. It's got a couple of reservoirs, at least two of them are within the park, and what is important is just as you leave the park, the density of human population immediately outside the park is the average is about 20 odd thousand per square kilometer, people per square kilometer. And like there are a mix of like you have housing colonies, some high-end housing colonies, some middle-income housing colonies, lots of slums. So it's a very diverse landscape in that sense. So this is one of 4 protected areas that are within a metropolis in the world. But this is one of the only places where you have a large carnivore that has a history in at least in India of killing people. There has been a spurt of attacks. For instance, in 2004, there was a spurt of attacks in SGNP, the Sanjay Gandhi National Park. Now, the Forest Department had some resources available to try and understand how interaction between people and leopards around Sanjay Gandhi National Park in Bombay. Because most of the laws are meant to protect large carnivores like leopards in protected areas. So they didn't really have many management tools and strategies to manage them in a metropolitan area like Bombay. So that's when they initiated this project with the resources they have, and the idea was to first do some research to understand what the issues are around human-leopard interactions, and then to then have mitigation measures implemented, so outreach and things like that. And most of the people on it are on it on a voluntary basis because they're interested. In my case, I've grown up around SGNP, so for me, it's giving back something to this space that has given me a lot. There's this master student who did some camera trapping around SGNP last year, and he was able to identify a minimum of 35 individual animals, which is a lot, which is higher than most protected areas in the world. So that's the minimum estimate. There might be more that weren't recorded in his camera trap. In 2011, when we had done camera trapping, we had identified 21 individuals.
So how connected are they to leopards in other places? Is the park sort of surrounded by metropolitan area, or is there interaction or exchange of individuals with other leopard populations?
The honest answer is we don't really know about the movement because we haven't really done any collaring of leopards in the area, so we don't know about the movement. However, having said that, there was one instance where the biologist I was talking about, Vidya Atreya, she had collared animals about 200 odd kilometers east of the national park, and one of them actually walked 100 odd kilometers in the span of 20 odd days to reach the periphery of the national park. And he just walked directly, like he knew exactly where he was going. So chances are that's not unusual of movement. Chances are this one was, trapped and relocated and was just returning back to where he was originally from. So based on that, we would suspect that there is movement. We just don't know of the movement. Regarding the connectivity, on 3 sides of the park, there is the metropolitan zone on 3 sides. But in the north, it is connected to another protected area called Tungareshwar Wildlife Sanctuary. So that, if they are looking at forest, that could be one way of going through. But they are also known, the leopard I was talking to you earlier, he at times, crossed the highway, crossed habitation, and just got to where he wanted to get to.
Are you getting calls along the way that people are seeing it, or is it doing all of this unseen?
I think it would be a mix. I think a lot of this is unseen because they're extremely sensitive and extremely smart animals. So if they know the area, they know when people are around, and they change their behavior to also respond to, say, the way people are using the space. In the case of this animal, it probably was moving mostly at night. It may have been seen off and on, but a lot of those people were not reported. A lot of them live, especially people who have lived around the national park for several decades, for instance. They don't really call if they see a leopard. They often say they've always been around. But the problem often starts when you have people who have moved in the last, say, 10 years, 15 years, who have come from other areas, who don't really have any background or history with leopards. So when they see a leopard, for them, that is a problem. So they are the ones who would call and, want a solution for what they see as a danger, a risk. I see 2004 was the big spurt. After that, from 2006 to 2012, there were no attacks or fatal attacks or even non-fatal attacks. 2012 to 2013, there were about 7 fatal attacks. And since 2013, there have been no fatal attacks around the national park. This is one of the things that has been covered a lot in the media whenever it happens, and that is the media also often has been used to at least hype it up, talking about bloodthirsty or man-eating, leopards that are roaming the landscape and stuff like that, which I don't think really did a very good PR job for the leopards. So anyway, but the media has been one of the groups that we have worked with over the last couple of years, and the reporting has changed, and they are making an effort to go deeper. And I think that has the role the media has played in the last couple of years has been a very responsible one, where they have been informing but not causing panic.
When there are attacks, what is a typical sort of attack? Or what are the patterns of how people get attacked?
I wouldn't say that there are specific patterns. There are these usual notions that, they won't attack someone who's, say, taller than, say, knee height, for instance. But we don't really know what happens when they actually attack. Like each case, we've investigated quite a few. Each case has been different. We don't really know the animal which attacked, so we don't really know why it attacked. In some cases, it has been opportunistic. So I don't think we can make a general statement on that. But what we can speak about is, say, what happened in 2004. That was a little different from what happened in 2012, since 2012. Because earlier there was a notion that, it's a wild animal. What it needs is forest. If you release a wild animal in the forest, it'll survive. The sense of that social territoriality of the animals was not something that everyone was aware of, including, say, scientists. So what was happening is a lot of animals are being trapped in other parts of the state, and this area was the only one that had a rescue center. So they would bring them and put them in the rescue center here, and when it was full, they would release them in the forest with the notion that it'll survive. But what has been found, and the biologist was talking about Vidya Atreya, she's focused on this, is that you take an animal once it's traumatized when it's being trapped, and two, you're releasing it in a space where it doesn't know anything. So that's recipe for trouble. And then it starts homing back to where it came from, and it would move through, say, human habitation, encounter people, is already stressed, and a lot of those attacks, we believe, were caused by such animals. Now trapping has more or less stopped, and now the focus is on trying to work with, say, people to get them to understand that just sighting does not mean you should trap the animal, and if you trap the animal, other animals will move into that area because there is a lot of prey.
So talk about the work of the group.
Yes, the phase one focused on trying to understand different aspects of this interaction. So partly, say, looking at, say, media reports, for instance, and where they were, what sort of reports they were. Looking at what people think, looking at, we did some camera trapping to at least get an idea of, individuals and to start creating a database of, individual animals. In 2012, for instance, there were 2 attacks. So then we got involved in investigating, trying to find out what may have happened and if any intervention is required. And there were cases where I think the biggest challenge that has been there now over the last couple of years is CCTV cameras. because earlier people would not be aware of leopards, but now they have proof that it's come to their area, and that can then be circulated on social media, for instance, which means it's a good, like, there's a lot of panic going around there. So we got involved in a couple of those things, and that's when we realized that one of the most important thing, and also from the research we did, that the most important thing was to have an outreach program to build that relationship between the forest department and the different stakeholders that they need to work with to manage this interaction. So phase 2 was implementing those recommendations. So say, for instance, the police. There are cases where, say, a leopard may have gone into a building and then is not able to come out. Now the forest that can handle the animal, but they don't have enough people to, say, manage crowds, and people get inquisitive. They want to take photographs and things. So then we've been working with the department has been working with the police to try and also sensitize them that when there's a situation like this, you focus on crowd control, allow us to just do our work. And that the police has been receptive. Then we've been working with the municipality because waste management, street lighting is their jurisdiction. And these are two issues which are very important in terms of, say, there's waste, there are things like dogs, rats, leopards feed on them. People see them, get scared. So, trying to reduce the sort of attractions, if I can call it, in these areas by working with the residents and the municipality. And yes, then there are the residents who are, I think, one of the key actors in this whole thing.
Are the dogs that the leopards are preying on, are they sort of free roaming stray dogs? Are they people's pets? Are they both? Are they sort of, what's the relationship of the dogs to the people in the places where the leopards are eating the dogs?
Okay. The largest population is free-ranging stray dogs, but there are also pets, and there are also community-owned dogs. Like, say, an apartment building, they have a dog that they'll be feeding and taking care of, and it stays like in the lobby and things like that. So it's not exactly a pet, but it's not exactly a free-ranging stray either. So you have a whole spectrum of relationships. Now, for instance, I can give an example of a leopard that had come into an apartment building, and they had a German Shepherd, which was community owned. It was living in the compound, but it was being fed by people in the apartment building. And they had a CCTV camera installed, and they had footage of the dog chasing the leopard away. That made news. So, there's that interaction also. Then there was another instance where if on YouTube, if you actually do a search.
Believe me, is this the one with the small dog that the leopard popped into the lobby and pulled it out?
Yeah. Yes. So when we spoke to the people in that apartment building complex, they were like, we used to have 6 dogs. We don't know what happened to 5, the first 5, but at least we know what happened to the 6th one. So,
I could guess what happened to the other 5.
I know, but they had no, at least they know definitely what happened. So there are things like that. And then there are, these stray dogs which will be outside these apartment building complexes. And there'll be some which are within, which are not really fed, but they are there. People don't drive them away. So there's a whole mix of these things. Regarding the stray dogs, there are, in the first phase, when we had sampled one area called RA, we had found 56 dogs per square kilometer in an area which is 13 square kilometers, spread over 13 square kilometers. So we estimate like there were 600 odd dogs in that area. So just to give you an idea. The second part I would say is like there is a lot of prey within the park also, but what we have been realizing over the last few years is that there are some leopards that actually live partly in the park and partly outside. So that's part of the territory. Like we would like to think of them as animals that live in the forest, but apparently they don't think in the same way. And then there are some other leopards that we have noticed that they seem to live outside the park. Like they don't go into the park at all, and they have actually grown up around human areas in the city. We know one individual; she actually grew up in and around a housing colony, and we have photographs of her as a cub. We have photographs of her. She was very graceful, is very graceful, and we had photographs that residents of the apartment buildings have taken photographs of her and just shared it with us. They said she's not a problem. We see her off and on.
I want to make sure I introduce the second part, which is by Vishal Shah, who had volunteered with the project, is now no longer associated with it, but on the website, which we'll link to, for the Mumbaikars for the SGNP, you'll find an essay, sort of a report about the factory incident he's about to describe.
So the animal, it just came out of nowhere actually, because this factory, if you look it up on the maps, it's located quite far from the national park, and it's also like like here's the national park, here is an education campus. It's the Indian Institute of Technology. Then there's a huge residing colony of people, and then there's a 4-lane road, and then of course there's around 4 tracks, the local train line. And then again, here is the factory. Now we were wondering where the hell the leopard came from. Like how did it cross so much, and how did it enter the factory? And now on the other side of the factory, so here is from the national park till the factory. I explained to you the situation. Now on the right hand side of the factory, we have the mangrove area completely. It's more easy to come from the mangrove side. But again, the park is pretty far away from the mangroves. There's a connection, but it's like a round connection. It's pretty far and it's pretty long. So, but we never really knew where the leopard came from. So now this leopard, it just entered the factory and it got trapped inside the workshop. Now it was spotted a couple of times before. It took away a couple of dogs there, and so they had already called the forest department a couple of times. We went there and we tried to set up camera traps, but the leopard was not really captured in the camera. So eventually, this leopard it got trapped in the workshop. So all the workers and the manager, of course, they just ran out when the leopard got inside the workshop. They closed all the doors and windows from outside. Now the doors and windows were made of glass, partially of glass. Now the windows were okay, they held on pretty strong, but the doors were not really locked properly. Now here is a situation where the leopard does not know what to do because it's been surrounded by people from outside, and there's a lot of grease around, and it's very slippery, and the leopard is like trying to come out of each and every exit that it could try to search for. So what happened was, the police and the manager, the factory manager, that he was just standing outside, and they were trying to figure out a way to capture the animal. The forest department was on its way, and so on. So like I said, the doors were not properly locked, and that's when it happened. The animal just pounced on the door, and the door just opened. And the animals just came out, and people were really like shocked. Or how the hell did it get out of the workshop? And the manager and the police, they were just sitting around having a cup of tea outside. And yeah, the manager, he was noticing the leopard, and the leopard just came out, and by the time he looked back, like he saw that he was the only person remaining there, because even the police had fled the situation. And like the workers, of course, they ran away. The police ran away, and he was the only guy who was standing there with the leopard in front of him, and just the police car, the police van standing there. And it was like a pretty dangerous situation for the manager. But the leopard here, it actually was not interested, in attacking anyone there, and it just hid, below the van, and then after some time, it just ran off and just disappeared in the slums next to the factory. Wow. I just went there, and yeah, and even it wasn't even spotted in the slums, and it's not that it was very dark during that time. It might have been around 5:30, 6 o'clock in the evening, and it just disappeared and was never really spotted again.
There's a lot to chew on in there.
Yeah.
Literally.
First thing I thought of is that if there was, the spurt of attacks that Sinetro referenced was, according to an article I found that I'll link to, that between 1991 and 2013, there were 176 attacks, and then 84 between 2002 and 2004, several of those fatal. I can't imagine a predator in the United States being permitted to exist next to a city if it's killing that many people. So that's its own interesting cultural statement right there.
Yeah, think about Aldo Leopold in, was it the early 1900s?
We're in Mike's living room where he's got a copy of Sand County Almanac, which is my Bible. But go ahead.
Yeah, it's a well-appreciated book. So he talks about the Lone Mountain, right? There's a mountain outside, it's somewhere in New Mexico, where there was this grizzly, and just because it existed, somewhat remotely near town, the whole town, and then ultimately the county and then the state all got behind. They sent bounty hunters to go kill this thing, and nobody could shoot it. So eventually they set like a snare trap that ended up killing this majestic beast, just because it was even remotely close. Well, thank you. Even remotely close to civilization.
Yeah.
Right. We are terrible and terribly afraid of charismatic megafauna.
Apparently not so much, though, in India.
Yeah, well, it's just inherent with the landscape. There hasn't been a culture of... There's been more of a culture of respect for super predator animals than there's been a persecution.
Yeah, and this is referenced in some of the materials that we'll link to about how that the people who are used to living around the park don't... It isn't like this is some scary exotic threat. It's like a routine threat, like we think of like crossing the street is like having leopards around. And as Sinetro had described, the spate of attacks was probably because of relocated leopards that didn't know the way around, were panicked, were lost essentially.
And you look at that spike in attacks over 1 year, and it really gets down to the individual basis.
Yeah, there's a few leopards in there.
There's a couple leopards that have they've found success in predating humans.
And we're gonna link to just because how could we not, to the CCTV, is that how you say it? CCTV video of the leopard popping into the lobby of the apartment building to pull out the dog. You feel for the dog, but damn.
Yeah, it's a lot of people have seen, because there was a viral video. I believe it's a predation in South America on a crocodilian.
It was like they came and getting picked off by that jag.
By a jag, right? But the same thing. This animal just quietly, stealthily walks up behind an unsuspecting,
swims
resting.
up on it.
I know, but now I'm relating that to this video, where you can imagine that the dog is just facing the other way, head down, resting,
and just like came out with the dog.
Kill tactic, as if it was truly in the wild with a wild prey item.
But in this case, like a marble or linoleum floor of a lobby. There's all kinds of little things implied in that video, like a leopard being comfortable around an apartment complex, having. Like you mentioned, that's dog number 6.
There.
It was subletting. Yeah. It was dog number 6. So that leopard's like done this before a few times, and this is just like you think of a leopard in its favorite like stand of rushes, like running after impala or something. I don't know, but like this is a leopard in its hunting ground in the lobby going for a dog.
This animal clearly knows the landscape.
Yeah.
Right?
Well. It was Airbnb. The leopard, totally got on Airbnb just to get access to that building to hunt dogs.
I'm trying to think of something serious to segue.
Well, it seems like a perfect storm, frankly. If you have a forest that's been inhabited by leopards, which are, forgive me for not knowing an adequate amount of the life history of these animals, but I'm going to make some assumptions. Please correct me if I'm
doing my best.
Wrong. But these animals are likely solitary by nature, right? I think the only communal cats are lions. So they're solitary in nature. They have huge home ranges, right?
Yeah.
And if 3 of your edges are urbanized landscapes,
which is it,
and there's opportunities to get food with less work potentially, which most That's
All of us go
synanthropic
for food
organism.
with
That's why squirrels and robins and cats and dogs, have these great benefits because it's there's a better they can eke out a decent living based on how we roll.
Yeah.
So that creates a culture of animals that I would say 15 to 17 years the average lifespan of a panther or of a
12 to 17 according to Wikipedia.
Okay, 12 to 17, according to Wikipedia, which is a terrible reference, but it's all we have right now. And it's likely accurate.
About a dozen years sounds about right. Yeah.
Sure. So, an animal that spends a better half of its life mapping its landscape, whether it's urban or wild, right, is going to really understand how to get around.
Right. I wonder, and I apologize if I missed it, did they say do these leopards come in from the forest, hunt, and come back, or
There's one of three scenarios. There's animals that live entirely in the forest. There's animals whose home ranges are half or partially in the forest and partially in the urbanized landscape. And then there's animals that they know with confidence are entirely urban panthers.
And that's the part that blew my mind.
Yeah.
Because it isn't just like they feel like hunting deer one day and tomorrow maybe I'll go get a dog.
Right.
These are leopards that live around apartment complexes.
Right.
And that's their home. It's an apartment complex.
Yeah.
And
they're like under they have to have a daytime hideout that's like under the foundation of a building or like what I mean,
something like that, or like up in the trees.
Up in a tree, yeah.
I'm thinking of like where my grandparents lived, their condo building, like at the edge of just outside Philadelphia. Like imagining like a leopard like hanging out in the tree in the parking lot,
right,
and then like hopping down at night to hunt dogs and deer, and it's essentially what you've got there,
Yeah.
And that's the.
I mean, we have raccoons that behave similarly, but they're raccoons.
It's what's happened with coyotes in American cities.
Yeah.
Where like some of them will live like in parks and then come out. Then you got ones that like basically den up in Chicago in parking garages.
Sure.
And like that's their home base.
So wild.
And so it's the same pattern with the leopards. It's just that instead of being coyotes that are 30 pounds, these are cats that can like kill you and haul you up a tree.
I've heard someone said that the human equivalent of leopard strength would be climbing a 3-story building with a couch in your teeth.
Oh my god, that's amazing.
I guess I'll put out a call, another request, because I know that there are leopards in Beijing. I've been hearing about it, but it's hard to find people who speak English and can talk about leopards in Beijing. Basically, we want your stories. There's a few things, so we're going to wrap up this episode. I'm going to put out a call for a few more topics. We want to hear about possums in Australia. I want to hear about urban weasels. We also want to hear about like mongooses, civets.
Is it mongoose?
No. I want to hear about civets.
Genets.
I mean, civets keep popping up.
Vivacidae, whatever, that whole group.
I know that there are urban palm civets in a lot of Southeast Asia. I know they've been introduced to Japan, and there are urban palm civets, but they're like exotic in Japan. So we want to hear about that. We want to hear, I don't know, man, there's a long list.
I saw some urban marmosets in Sao Paulo.
Do you know anybody who...
Marmosets? Like cute-ass marmosets?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
I have video of me like feeding them and shit. It's awesome.
Why didn't you tell me this before? You've been holding out.
I'm going to be honest with you, Billy. I get around and I see lots of wildlife in cities. It's hard to recall every instance of wildlife I've seen in a city every time.
But marmosets?
Yeah.
It isn't like seeing a crow.
The cutest damn thing you ever did see.
They are ridiculous. Like, straight up, like, I was like, I was hanging out with Paulo, my main man in Brazil, and he's just like, "Oh, we got some time before I bring you back to your hotel.
Let's go feed some marmosets."
He's like, let's go feed some, and my hotel was in Sao Paulo, He's like, "Oh, let's just go feed some marmosets in this park in Sao Paulo." I'm like, "What?" And like he walks up there, he buys like those little tiny bananas from like some dude, and there's just like marmosets chilling in this park. This trip.
I need someone to tell me that and be serious.
And like straight up,
yo, marmosets chill in this park.
Yeah.
Oh, word? Like, let me get some bananas.
So
So those are some of our requests for topics, and basically anything else. I mean, if you're in an urban area and you got a smartphone which can record voice notes, which we know you do, and you're seeing something cool, tape a little something and send it our way, or call us on our voicemail at 267-603-3219. Again, 267-603-3219. If you've got thinking bigger, if you've got something you want us to interview somebody about, if you've got a research study that you're doing, you want to talk about it a little bit, we're always happy to talk. Hit us up on Twitter at Herb Wildlife Cast. Find us on Facebook. You can write us at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com and throw in some comments and rate us on your favorite podcasting app, whether you're listening to us on Stitcher or I think we're going to start doing SoundCloud.
Yeah.
iTunes. Tell us what you think of it. Give it a rating. Tell your friends. Next episode, we're going to do where art and urban wildlife intersect. So we're going to talk to a dude from Miami who studies corals in Miami, and does sort of public art installations about Miami corals. And then we're going to talk to a guy who I found from Dhaka in Bangladesh about starlings in Dhaka and his project looking at starlings in the work of one of Bangladesh's favorite or most famous poets. And that'll be waiting for you next time you tune into the Urban Wildlife Podcast.
Cheers, everybody. Enjoy urban wildlife every day.
Every day.
Well, Billy's looking for that. What's the podcast?
Tristan.
What's the podcast brought to tonight by? Old Crow.
Old Crow.
Old Crow.
Corvid voice.
The Corvus Maze.